This is Off the Cuff, and I'm Steve from TorahFamily.org. This teaching goes in parallel with several of our other teachings, but I would think mainly with the winter timeline and the 11th month. If you haven't seen these teachings, I would encourage you to do so as they complement this teaching. As I've said in the past, history is cyclical, but it won't always be identical. So, we'll see patterns throughout history, but they may vary from one point to another. And we know regarding the end times, Yahweh said through the prophet Isaiah that he makes known the end from the beginning. Exactly how and when would be the questions. So, while the imagery of it all being cyclical may be there, the details may differ. And while it was Isaiah that shows Yahweh makes known the end from the beginning, we can't forget that it was also through the prophet Isaiah that Yahweh said, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland. The wild animals honor me, the jackals and the owls, because I provide water in the desert and streams in the wasteland, to give drink to my people, my chosen, the people I formed for myself, that they may proclaim my praise." So while the end is declared from the beginning, there's obviously some things in the past that won't match the former things. We'll come back to that thought in a moment to look at the full context of those verses. However, notice the comment about the wild animals at the time of this new thing. He then calls those wild animals his chosen. This goes in parallel with Hosea chapter 2. Hosea 2:18. "In that day I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field and the birds of the air and the creatures that move along the ground. Bow and sword and battle I will abolish from the land, so that all may lie down in safety. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge Yahweh." Then, a few verses later, we read this, verse 23. "I will plant her for myself in the land. I will show my love to the one I called not my loved one. I will say to those called not my people, you are my people. And they will say, you are my God." This goes in perfect parallel with what is said in Isaiah, with how the wild animals are declared his people. This is why we see Peter's vision in Acts chapter 10. He was reminding Peter how the prophet said the wild animals represented the Gentiles coming to faith. We see this happened 3 times to Peter. Then 3 Gentiles came to the door looking for Peter. This is all detailed in our teaching, Acts 10, to eat or not to eat. In fact, we see these verses in Hosea is the time of the new covenant, as highlighted here. But back to our verses in Isaiah that calls us to forget the things of the past. The context before these verses show the timing of this new thing being mentioned takes place with the destruction of Babylon. Starting in verse 12. "I have revealed and saved and proclaimed, I, and not some foreign god among you. You are my witnesses, declares Yahweh, that I am God. Yes, and from ancient days I am He. No one can deliver out of my hand. When I act, who can reverse it? This is what Yahweh says, your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. For your sake, I will send to Babylon and bring down as fugitives all the Babylonians in the ships in which they took pride. I am Yahweh, your Holy One, Israel's Creator, your King. This is what Yahweh says, He who made a way through the sea, a path through the mighty waters, who drew out the chariots and horses, the army and reinforcements together, and they lay there, never to rise again, extinguished, snuffed out like a wick. Then verse 18 begins the section where we are to forget the former things. So we see the destruction of Babylon comes at the time he says he's doing a new thing. And just as we see this new thing with the new covenant tied together with the destruction of Babylon, here in Isaiah 43, we also see the new covenant with the marriage of the Lamb taking place immediately after the destruction of Babylon in Revelation 18 and 19. Chapter 18 focuses on the destruction of Babylon, as seen here. Chapter 19 then focuses on what transpires in heaven immediately afterwards, the wedding. So, if the end is made known from the beginning, and ancient times what is still to come, but we're also told to forget the former things, we're still left with the questions of exactly how and when would these things play out? What elements of the end times will be mirrored from the beginning? And what former things should be forgotten? Did Yeshua give us any hints on how to distinguish between these two questions? Did he give us anything that may help us narrow down our options? Well, maybe. As with all our end-time teachings, this is simply another theory for us to throw into the mix. Consider what Yeshua said at the time he was being taken to be crucified. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, 'Blessed are the barren women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?" What will happen when it is dry? The winter. Now, please notice verse 30. Then they will say to the mountains, "Fall on us," and to the hills, "Cover us." Yeshua is actually quoting from Hosea chapter 10 that discusses the northern kingdom of Israel, who was eventually banished to the nations. Many forget that Israel was divided into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. While many apply this passage to the time when Assyria finally conquered the northern kingdom in 721 BC, verse 10 seems it could still be a prophecy for the future. Verse 10 says, "Nations will be gathered against them to put them in bonds for their double sin." Nations. Not a nation, but rather nations, plural. They will be conquered by war, and survivors will be taken as prisoners. Yeshua implies this to be a future event that will take place when the trees are dry, the winter. Interestingly enough, we see this exact same phrase used in Revelation. It's verse 16 that matches the words of Yeshua in Luke 23 and the words of Hosea chapter 10. As you know, Those who are hiding in the caves at this event are those who fight Yeshua in the Battle of Armageddon at the end. So this isn't the end of the tribulation being spoken of here. This is the beginning of the tribulation. And according to Yeshua, it seems this all starts when the trees are dry. So, while the end is declared from the beginning, but we're supposed to forget the things of the past, what could be the options? We know the 10th day of the 10th month is a fast that's turned into a feast. So this is easily an option. We've also discussed how the 11th month on the Hebrew calendar is the month of Shevat, also pronounced by some as Shabbat, which could have been what Yeshua was referencing when he said to pray that our flight does not take place in the winter or the Sabbath, meaning the month of Shabbat and not the day of Shabbat. While this may not be the case, I believe we at least need to consider it as a possibility. So, in that light, any time during the 11th month could be a possibility. Also, for what it's worth, it's the first day of the 11th month that we see everything take place in the book of Deuteronomy. That being said, please consider what Moses said on that day. Deuteronomy 26:16. Yahweh your God commands you this day to follow these decrees and laws. Carefully observe them with all your heart and with all your soul. You have declared this day that Yahweh is your God, and that you will walk in his ways, that you will keep his decrees, commands, and laws, and that you will obey him. And Yahweh has declared this day that you are his people, his treasured possession, as he promised, and that you are to keep all his commands. Does any of that sound familiar? Please consider again what we read regarding what is said at the time of the new covenant. I will plant her for myself in the land. I will show my love to the one I called not my loved one. I will say to those called not my people, you are my people. And they will say, you are my God. This was all done on the first day of the 11th month, which also happens to be the day of Moses' birthday. So, the 11th month is definitely something for us to keep in mind. We then find Purim in the 12th month. It isn't exactly dry during Purim. By this time on the calendar, things are in the beginning stages of turning back to green. At the same time, Yeshua's reference could be a generic time for the season and not specifically saying it's going to be dry. I hope that makes sense. In other words, he may not be meaning it's going to be literally dry, but rather the season of that which is when it's dry. That's something we have to at least be open to. Purim just can't be breezed over. There's a lot of prophetic symbolism in this story, and it can easily fulfill many elements to come by way of what we see in Revelation. Now, just as much as we have biblical dates to keep in mind for when the trees are dry, are there other days we should be considering? We know it will be a time of judgment and salvation at the same time. So, could we be seeing a date that coincides with something of a pagan holiday or a pagan nature, if you will? I don't know about you, but when considering this, the first thing that goes through my mind is, why would he take his bride on a day that's significant to pagan practices? And I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that's the case, but we must remember it's about saving his bride from what's about to happen at the same time. It's a day of redemption and destruction at the same time. Meaning, the destruction comes, or I should say could come, on a pagan day, which would be why the destruction comes. Therefore, the salvation comes at that time as well. Hope that makes sense. Isaiah 24 discusses a worldwide earthquake. This is also seen in Revelation chapter 6. This takes place at the time the kings and generals hide in caves. Consider what's said regarding this day in Isaiah 24. Starting in verse 7, the new wine dries up, and the vine withers. All the merrymakers groan. The gaiety of the tambourines are stilled. The noise of the revelers has stopped. The joyful harp is silent. No longer do they drink wine with a song. The beer is bitter to its drinkers. The ruined city lies desolate. The entrance to every house is barred. In the streets they cry out for wine. All the joy has turned to gloom. All gaiety is banished from the earth. The city is left in ruins. Its gate is battered to pieces. These verses imply it could happen at a time of great rejoicing or partying. When looking at how this time is described by Isaiah, I actually get the feeling it's an event like Fat Tuesday. That day, many go out and get all their sins in before the time of Lent. This is a day celebrated around the world. Though it's of Catholic origins, many from all denominations take part in it. I have to confess, I can see this fitting for the time of judgment to begin. This day represents the heart of the people, to go out and get fat on sin before they have to repent. One can't help but see the possibility of this even through what's said in Amos chapter 8, starting in verse 9. In that day declares sovereign Yahweh, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. I will turn your religious feasts into mourning and all your singing into weeping. I will make all of you wear sackcloth and shave your heads. I will make that time like mourning for an only son, and the end of it like a bitter day. As silly as it may sound to some, this verse can bring Christmas Day into the mix as well. Another pagan day that falls in winter just the same. And at the same time, this verse can easily apply to Purim just the same. We've noted the importance of Purim in several other teachings, and I can see how it could equally be the time when everything begins. It just has so many prophetic images within it. With all of this to keep in mind, I sincerely believe it's the words of Yeshua we need to pray over more than anything. Luke 23:31. For if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? So, exactly what part of the beginning reveals the end is yet to be seen. And exactly how and when the new is brought into place, well, that's yet to be seen as well. But may we never stop watching and praying until it all falls into place. Well, that's all I have. Think about it. Pray about it. But more than anything, be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Until next time, Shalom.